Hello, biologists. Today we're going to talk about seed plants, specifically conifers. Our next lecture will be on angiosperms. So to remind us what seed plants are, here is a phylogenetic tree of plants. We have the charophytes, which are the most ancestral of the plants. And if we look down their branch to the node, we see that they are the outgroup. They're the least related to everybody else in this tree. And down here at the base of the root, we would have the common green algae ancestor that gave rise to all of these plants. We're remembering that time goes up as we look through our grouping of plants. So all of these options here, all of these taxa are extant. Each little trait represented by a black dot is going to denote from this point forward on the tree. So everyone from here forward, liverworts through flowering plants, has embryo protection, but seeds only encompasses the gymnosperms and the angiosperms. That is going to be our cone-bearing plants and our fruit-bearing plants. We're going to focus on the gymnosperms today. Our gymnosperms, which we call spermatophytes for seed plants in general, but the gymnosperms are the first 4 types in this group. So gymnosperms encompass the cycads, the ginkgos, the conifers, and the nido, you kind of ignore the G, nidophytes. Remember, phyte means plant, and these are, they are actually really neat. They're like the weirdest group in this lecture. So I'm excited to tell you about these. Gymno means naked, and so these are naked seed producing plants. Angiosperms, those are flower producing, and that will be the focus of next lecture. This picture here shows you our Pseudotsuga menziesii, pseudo being false. Suga is fir, so it's a false fir, and menziesii is named for a last name. When it ends in II, that indicates that it's somebody's name. So later, when you discover a plant and you name it after your biology professor, Catherine Creech, you could call it Pseudotsuga creechii, and it would have 2 I's at the end. This is our state plant, by the way, our state tree, the Douglas fir. It's the predominant type of conifer in our Oregon forests. Here are our seed plants phylogenetic tree. Remember, spermatophores are going to be all of our seed plants. Angiosperms produce flowers. And then our gymnosperms are these 5 divisions just discussed. Now, this tree here is what is commonly accepted based on molecular data, and that means genetic data. But this does not align with our expectations based on the morphological species concept. And the reason being is because nidophytes, they are morphologically very dissimilar to everybody else in the group. And so if we were making a phylogenetic tree for gymnosperms based on morphology, the nidophytes would be the outgroup. But our common understanding of genetics is telling us that not only are they not the outgroup, but they are closely related to pines, which they look nothing like, and they might even belong inside of the pine group, which gives all of us biologists weird feelings. We don't really like it, but we have to trust the data. It is the best information that we have right now. And the cool thing about data is it changes as we learn more. So in the future, maybe nidophytes won't be sister group to the pines, but for right now, nidos and pines are sisters, just like the most dissimilar sisters you've ever seen. Here is a generalized life cycle for spermatophytes. Spermatophytes are heterosporous. The prefix hetero means different, and sporous is going to refer to how they produce spores. We have 2 types of spores. We have megaspores and we have microspores. Megaspores are going to develop into the female gametophytes, and they're going to produce the eggs. Microspores are going to mature into the male gametophytes, and they're going to produce sperm. Here is the sporophyte. We know that the sporophyte is diploid. Our diploid individual will do meiosis, and it will produce haploid cells. Those haploid cells will be either megaspores or microspores. Those will mature into your megagametophyte or your microgametophyte, and the gametophyte produces gametes. So your microgametophyte will make sperm, your megagametophyte will make egg. These are haploid. They need to be haploid so that when fertilization occurs, you create a diploid zygote, which develops into an embryo. And in the seed plants, this is encased in a seed that will later germinate and grow into your sporophyte, and the process will start again. Here is a sample of our spermatophytes. This is a conifer. So let's just pretend that this is a Douglas fir. Here is its mature body. It is the sporophyte. It is diploid. It'll produce male cones and female cones. This is the male cone on the bottom. This is the female cone. In conifers, the female cone is what we think of as a pine cone. The male cones are reduced and they kind of disintegrate. They're really common and you've noticed them, but you might not have paid attention to them. They are physically different in size and they are texturally different, and their ability to withstand long periods of time are different. So here, this little male gametophyte, it's going to contain the microsporangium, and the microsporangium will produce pollen. Inside the pollen is where the sperm is. The female gametophytes are on the female cones. So here's a female gametophyte. Inside, you'll have a structure called an ovule. The ovule will contain the egg. All right, spermatophytes are super successful. If you think about our forests here, most of them are spermatophytes. It's very rare not to have a forest that's either a flowering plant or a gymnosperm of some type. And they're so successful because they no longer need water for fertilization. That's cool because they can colonize land, dry areas, areas that freeze, areas that are going to have different habitats, variable habitats, much more easily than our seedless plants, which are water dependent. The reason that they are so cool and able to do this is because the gametophytes are now reduced. They're no longer short-lived. So they're no longer their own body. They're now part of the female and male cones. And because we have pollen. Pollen is the male gametophyte. This is pollen over here. The color is fake. This is from scanning electron micrographs. So this is itty-bitty, barely visible, and it has to be really small with all this ornamentation because the pollen is usually wind dispersed. And these little holes and divots and projections would catch the wind and then they'd blow away. And it allows them to be desiccation prevention, which means that they are preventing themselves from dehydrating too much, but also they can travel huge distances, miles. We've actually found pollen in atmospheric rivers up in the air, and they can just go for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles. So it's really incredible how far these male gametophytes can travel and theoretically pollinate someone else on like the other side of the state. And these seeds are really the key here. The seeded plants are amazing because the seed protects the embryo. It also nourishes the embryo, and seeds can last years, maybe hundreds, maybe thousands. They could still be viable. We're not completely sure how long they totally last because we haven't been studying it this long. But they allow your plants to take their time. They don't have to germinate immediately. They're not reliant on that water system for fertilization. And so this whole process is really drawn out, and these plants become very long-lived. Spermatophytes are also so successful because they have secondary growth. That allows them to grow outward. So now they get girth. When you have girth, you can create a taller plant because you can structurally hold it up against the wind and the gravity. It allows these plants to compete for space and light because all of the photosynthetic parts of the plant are up higher with higher access to sunlight. They're not down in the shadow of the understory. And that secondary growth means that there's a lot of wood. Wood is a new invention in the plant world. It's really exciting. This wood is called xylem. And xylem is used to transport water from the ground up to the photosynthetic parts of the plant. Here's a picture of the giant sequoias, Sequoia dendron giganteum, in Yosemite National Park in California. And this is in contrast to this building in the background. Some of these trees are so big that they have cut big holes into the base and you can drive cars through them. It's pretty incredible. Gymno means naked, and so these are the naked seeds. They're naked because the seed is not enclosed in an ovary. If it was enclosed in an ovary, we would call it a fruit. So there are no fruits in gymnosperms. Instead, seeds are partially sheltered on modified leaves called sporophylls. So sporo and then phyll means leaf. This is a collection of sporophylls all around a central stalk. We call this a strobilus. That's basically another word for cone. So this is a pine cone. It's from the genus Pinus. This is a coulter pine. And this pine cone will have little divots at the base of these scales. And these scales are the sporophylls. And so at the base here, that will be where you have your ovules, which contain the egg. So this will contain the seeds for the females, and they will eventually be released and dropped to the ground and maybe germinate into another plant. Gymnosperms are also able to survive harsh winters and dry areas because they have xerophytic leaves. Xerophytic means that they're able to survive dehydration and desiccation. So they've evolved to be water conserving. The way that they've done this is with shrunken stomata. So if I look at this cross section of a pine leaf right here, the stomata are tiny and they're sunken in. Sunken in being like they push inward so that they're not exposed on the surface. And that creates a little tiny micro habitat for them where the humidity can be higher in that shrunken pocket than it is outside of the leaf. They also have a nice thick cuticle to prevent desiccation. They have an endodermis, which wraps around the xylem and the phloem. So that's this layer here, the endodermis, that prevents desiccation. And they've reduced the surface area to volume ratio. And that's why pine needles are long and thin. So they have reduced the amount of stomata they need by reducing the surface area. They also have resin canals. If you look here, these empty holes are resin canals. Those are not actually an adaptation to be xerophytic. These are not helping it prevent dehydration, but the resin is bitter, sticky, gross. And the idea is that it prevents herbivory. No one wants to chew on a sticky, bitter, gross leaf. Our first type of gymnosperm is the cycads. Cycads are so cool. If we look at these leaves, we can tell that they're really shiny. That shine comes from the thick cuticle. So this is the xerophytic type of leaves. They're also really leathery, so they're really tough. And then here in the center, we have a female cone. So this is the female producing strobilus. They were the predominant plant in the Mesozoic era, about 65 to 230 million years ago. They were the main food source for herbivorous dinosaurs, and they are dioecious. That means that each plant is either male or female. They'll produce one type of cone, but not both. Our cycads are more than 50% endangered or threatened. Their habitats are being shrunken, and they are often found in greenhouses and botanical gardens because they need special care. They're usually stout, they're woody, they have cylindrical trunks. They morphologically kind of look like palm trees, except they are not producing fruit, so they are not a palm tree. Palm trees are angiosperms. They have those large, stiff, evergreen leaves that we talked about, and they can be insect pollinated, and their sperm is still flagellated. So there's a little bit of a remnants of the reliance on water. Here we can see the male cones. So this is last year's male cone, and this is this year's male cone. It will continue to grow, and then it will fall sideways like this one has. Next is our ginkgo. Ginkgo is amazing. It is monotypic, mono being one, typic being type. So there's only one species left in this genus. That is Ginkgo biloba. So any ginkgo you've ever seen is Ginkgo biloba. Ginkgo biloba is beautiful. It has male plants and female plants. That's dioecious. It's got this distinctive fan-shaped leaf. They have very long lifespans. Some that are alive today are estimated to be 3,500 years old, which is incredible. And they have amazing fruit, and I'm using air quotes because it's not true fruit, but they have this seed, and around the outside of the seed, there's this fleshy layer, and it's stinky. It smells. It smells like vomit. It smells like dog poop. It's actually illegal to plant female ginkgos in many cities because it smells so bad. It's considered a public nuisance. That fleshy layer is called the sarcotesta. Remember testa when we talked about protists? Testa means shield. So it's the sarcotesta, and it's not a true fruit, but it looks like a fruit. The seeds themselves inside of this really disgusting, stinky layer are edible, and they're commonly eaten, but they're also mildly toxic, and they do cause damage when consumed regularly. So they are edible, but they're also not something that you want to eat, which is interesting. I've tried them. They're actually quite good. Just don't eat a lot of them and don't eat them regularly. In the fall, these deciduous trees, which means they lose their leaves in the winter, have incredible color. It's this lovely orange gold color. We have two big ginkgos on campus in the back right by welding. And every fall, they're just stunning, absolutely gorgeous trees. They are wind pollinated and they have flagellated sperm. There is a ginkgo that is on my bucket list to see. It's in the Guguanyin Temple in China, and it is 1,400 years old. So here's the tree. This is the square that it lives in. And in the fall, you can see the color change. These are all leaves that get dropped by this ginkgo. It creates a huge crowd. You need a reservation. It's totally on my list of things to see in my life. And what's really cool about ginkgos is when they drop their leaves, they don't do it slowly over like a month. They do it in a few days over the course of like a week. And so it'll go yellow, but it won't stop dropping the leaves until it's ready. And then it'll do all the leaves really quickly. And that's why you get this incredible carpet of just this gold color. They're considered living fossils because the trees that exist today morphologically are pretty much the same as the fossils we have from 290 million years ago. So they are unchanged from their fossils, thus they are living fossils. Now we get into our cnidophytes. Our cnidophytes are weird. They look like angiosperms. They have flower-like structures. Just like angiosperms, they're going to do double fertilization, which we're going to focus on in the next lecture. They have vessel elements like angiosperms, but they're not. They're not angiosperms, and they're not angiosperms because they don't have fruit, they don't have true fruit, they don't have true flowers, and genetically they seem to be really closely related to pines specifically. Here is ephedra. It's got these green stems. It looks almost like a grass. These look like flowers, but they're male cones. They're male cones producing sperm. All of our cnidophytes are dioecious, meaning there's males and females. They are wind pollinated or insect pollinated, but they don't have flagella. And their leaves are always opposite, which means they come out on the same spot of the branch. So they're opposite of each other, not alternate where they come out one then the other. They come out at the same point. That's opposite. We're going to talk about Welwitschia in a second, but boy, what a weirdo. We have three genera. Welwitschia is another monotypic species. Then we have Needham, and we have ephedra. So each of these has a whole bunch of species in them, as weird as you can get. So here is Welwitschia. Welwitschia grows in the Namib Desert, which is on the southwest edge of Africa, down by Namibia and South Africa, so right along the coast. You can see the desert habitat back here, which is great because gymnosperms have xerophytic leaves, although this one has two leaves that are opposite, and they grow continually like fingernails, and they're thick and they're leathery, and the wind whips them around, and so they break into these pieces. They separate like string cheese, and that string cheese separation creates all these ribbons. But if you go to the base of this plant, you'll see that it's really just two long, hideous, leathery leaves. We know that they can live thousands of years. We're not totally sure yet how long, but definitely thousands. They have cones coming out the center of the plant. I'm going to go back to the last slide. This is a Welwitschia showing off its cones. And here you can see the two leaves coming out of the plant, this thick leathery structure of the plant, and two opposite leaves. And then here are your cones. So really weird, weird plant. Next, we have Needham. Needham is tropical, which is odd for gymnosperm. They have flat leaves that are evergreen, so at least that makes sense. And they have flowering structures and berry-like structures. Superficially, they look like flowering plants. To me, if I looked at this really quickly, I'd be like, oh, that's coffee. That's a coffee plant. But these are not true fruit. Their flowers are not true flowers, even though they can be vines. And that are tropical, these are cones, and they do not produce the structures that angiosperms produce. Here is Needham. You can see these flower-like structures. Instead of being a flower, these are male cones. There are many edible types of Needham. The leaves, the roots, the seeds, all edible, highly nutritious. So because of that, they are an agriculture crop, and they are economically important. Generally, they're in tropical areas in Africa, South America, and Southeast Asia. We don't have any that grow in our area, but weird because they look like flowering plants, even though they're not. Ephedra, another neophyte. Ephedra is the basis for the drug ephedrine, and it was used in stimulants. It was used in decongestants. Ephedrine was one of the base drugs used to make methamphetamines. So it's a high stimulant. You can actually make a tea out of it, and that tea will have a strong caffeine-like effect, so increased heart rate and energy. But the FDA banned this substance because it has a huge risk of heart attack, so it's not a safe plant to be consuming. It does grow in arid areas in America, so that's pretty cool. Arid means dry. So this is a prairie plant. It's found in grasslands. This structure here looks like a juicy berry. It is not. This is the female cones. So the female cones, these are sporophylls, and they contain the ovule. Really bizarre. This doesn't look like a pine cone, but it's in the same family. It's a gymnosperm. Here we see the flower-like structure, but it is not a flower. It is a male cone. This one, Ephedra fomanea, produces these cones, but what's really cool about them is that they release their pollen on a lunar cycle associated with full moons. And as they do, the female cones will release a droplet of sugary water, and that sparkles in the full moon. And that allows pollinators that are nocturnal to visit these male cones, pick up pollen, and bring it to the sparkling female cone, and fertilization occurs overnight with the full moon. Really incredible process. Then we get into our traditional gymnosperms, what everyone thinks of when they think of a gymnosperm, and that's the conifers. Conifers are going to be your pines, your spruces, your firs, cedars, sequoias, yews. They have two types of cones, the female cones, which we think of as a pine cone, and then the male cones, which are going to be creating pollen. These are tiny and short-lived, and if you rub them like this in your fingers, they disintegrate. So these they put out every year. Female cones can be several years old, decades old. These little cones, each one of these is a sporophyll, and then that right there is a seed connected to it. These trees are monoecious. Monoecious means that they do male and female cones on the same plant. So now one plant is both male and female. If we look at conifer pollen, it's wind pollinated, and it has these cute little Mickey Mouse ears. We call them winged, and that allows this pollen to fly really easily in the wind. You can see all this pollen in the wind here from these male cones of this pine tree, and this pollen can travel great distances. Let's talk about the life cycle of a conifer. First, we're going to do a quick overview. Here's my sporophyte. My sporophyte is diploid. This whole thing is going to take 2 to 3 years. They live a really long time, but they're late bloomers. It takes them to be at least 30 years on average before they start having sex. And this is what their sex looks like. Sporophyte produces male and female cones. The male and female cones contain the gametophytes. This is a female gametophyte with the ovule. Inside the ovule is the structure that will become the egg. The male cone produces pollen. Inside the pollen is the sperm. The sperm will travel through a pollen tube to the egg, and it will fertilize the egg, creating the zygote. This seed structure will allow the seed to be dispersed. The little wing at the end lets it like twirl as it flies through the air after it drops off the female cone. After fertilization, you have your diploid seed. The diploid seed is going to contain some nutrients and a protective overwintering coat. These seeds can be viable for years and years. So the entire process takes 2 to 3 years to produce a seed, and then the seed can be viable for years further. Now let's get into some specifics. We're going to use a pine tree for an example because we're used to seeing pine trees. Here is my sporophyte. It is diploid. On my sporophyte, I'm going to have branches with pine needles. And on some of those pine needle branches, I will have female cones and I will have male cones. We'll start with the female cone. So here's an ovulate cone. It's called ovulate because on the female cone, you have these scales called sporophylls. On the sporophylls, you have the ovule. Down here is the ovule. This is the ring structure, wing structure that will allow it to fly away. So down here, we're going to look in the base of this. Here is our scale. This is our ovule. The protective layer around the ovule is called the integuments. It is made of sporophyte tissue, so it is diploid. Inside of your integuments, you're going to have the megasporangium. It's diploid so far. And inside the megasporangium, you're going to have the megaspore mother cell. That is diploid as well. The hole in the integuments where the pollen can later access the egg that we're going to create is called the micropyle. So that is the hole in the integuments. So now this megaspore mother cell is going to do meiosis. As it does meiosis, it's going to produce 4 haploid megaspores, but only 1 survives. So you make 4, but 3 die, and 1 of them is left. Here's my megaspore. It is haploid. Now my megaspore is going to start to grow inside of the integuments, which is still from the mother plant, the diploid sporophytes. You're going to have the female gametophytes. Inside the female gametophyte, you're going to have the archegonium, and the archegonium is going to produce the egg. These 3 tissues right here are all haploid. They are the product of meiosis. So now I'm going to grow even further. The egg is going to get larger. It's going to create 2 of itself. And then in the back, this is all archegonium. That will later become the endosperm. Okay, so now let's talk about pollination. Here is the pollen cone. This is the male. Inside of the pollen cone, there are little sporophylls, and those sporophylls contain the microsporangium. The microsporangium will have the microspore mother cells. The microspore mother cells will do meiosis. They will produce pollen. That pollen will fly through the air and hopefully land on the micropyle of a female of the same species. Once that occurs, we say that pollination is done. But from pollination to fertilization, it takes a full year. So that's what I mean by these are long-lived but late bloomers. The whole thing is slow. So over the course of a year, the pollen sits there, and when it's ready, we're going to skip down here. This pollen that has landed on the micropyle will start to germinate. By germinating, it's going to produce a tube. That tube is called the pollen tube. That pollen tube grows up toward the egg, and one of the sperm nuclei, the haploid nuclei from the pollen, is going to fertilize the egg. So that's our fertilization event. Everything else that was in the egg is going to grow into the endosperm. The endosperm is the nutrients for the embryo. The fertilized egg is now diploid. It's a zygote. That zygote is going to grow and develop into the embryo. And as that embryo sits there inside of its seed coat, which is formed from the sporophyte, it will be dispersed, it will land somewhere, and then this embryo, when it's ready, will start to grow. As it grows, it's going to use the food and the nutrients from the endosperm, and it's going to consume that to get the energy it needs to turn into a seedling. So it's going to use the energy here to power its mitosis, and it will grow and develop into a baby tree, and that baby tree over the course of hundreds of years will grow into a mature sporophyte. I say hundreds of years, but things for like Doug firs, they grow pretty quickly, so maybe a couple decades. All right. Boom, boom, boom. Our seed definition, by the way, I want to make sure that we got this clarified. A seed is the seed coat, which came from the integument of the sporophyte. The food supply, which is the endosperm, so that was created during meiosis from the female cone, and the embryo, which is the product of fertilization from the sperm and the egg. All right, now it's time for you to practice. I want you to take these words that have been removed from this life cycle and put each of those words in the appropriate spot. Go ahead and pause your video, and then we'll see the answers. All right, so your ovule is going to be on the female sporophyte quills. Here's the sporophyll. So your ovules are going to be up here on your scales. This is our female cone. Here are the scales. There's the ovule on the female cone. The megasporangium is inside of the ovule. The megasporocyte is in the center of the ovule. If we look here, we have the male cones. These are the microsporangiums, and the microsporocyte is inside the microsporangiums. Both of the sporocytes, the mega and the micro, will do meiosis. As they do meiosis, they're going to produce the pollen, which contains the sperm, and the egg cells, which are going to be fertilized by the pollen. Here we have the pollen tube growing toward the egg. And here we can see the egg cells with the sperm nuclei. Once the sperm fuses to the egg, we'll have fertilization. And fertilization creates the zygote, which becomes the seed. The seed coat is this darker brown color. That is made from integuments. So here is where the label for seed coat is, wrapped around the seed, which contains the food and the embryo plant. All right, this is our overview of what different types of families exist in the conifers. We think of pines pretty easily. In our area, we also think of redwood and cypress. Sometimes we think of yews. There's two different types of yews. Types of pines that you might not be familiar with is the araucaria. Araucaria are really cool. They're called monkey puzzle trees. They're really spiky. They're really beautiful. We have some on campus. So if you come to campus, please come find me and I will take you to see these trees. They are incredible. And then we have two types, the podocarps and the umbrella tree. Podocarps exclusively live in the southern hemisphere, so we don't have a lot of exposure to them here. And the umbrella tree is monotypic. There's only one species left, and it only lives in Japan. But if you take a botany class, you will get into how to identify these different types of trees. And in our area, we have wonderful examples of them. You have enough vocab, so I'm not going to ask you to learn the different types, but I do think it's important to know examples of conifers, including pines, Doug firs, all of those really neat trees that we just discussed. I hope you have a great day. Let me know if you have any questions. Email me anytime, and we'll talk soon. Bye.